paper is presented by Dr. Alexandra Andhov. I'm sure some people are still joining us, given that we have a minute to go until we start. So I'll just give a very brief introduction to our first speaker. So Dr. Andhov is an assistant professor at the University of Copenhagen, Denmark, though she has in the past worked at the Oxford Law School over here in the UK, the London University and the University of Turin. Dr. Andhov's paper considers bringing technology and new skill set into the law school. And I think there's a very strong theme about this throughout the 3 papers that we have for this session. So could I hand over to you now, Dr. Andhov, for your 15-minute paper. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. I'm now trying to see, also joining you in the morning from Copenhagen. We have a lovely sunny day. Let me try to share my screen. It should be working, correct?
Yes, excellent. Thank you.
All right. So
chat box if you can. We'll keep an eye on those and then we'll pose them to Dr. Andhov at the end of the paper. Thank you.
Yes. Feel free. Yes, thank you very much. Feel free to, ask questions. I kind of hope, you plan the talk to be for a certain amount of time. Sometimes you are shorter, sometimes you're longer, but I hope to keep a couple minutes for discussions, because I do think that technology and new skill set is very contextual, and with that regard, I kind of also designed the presentation to reflect the realities in Denmark and my experiences here. I do hope that many of you can see some similarities or get some inspiration. However, I do want to emphasize that ultimately, I believe that, whatever works here in Denmark at our faculty might not necessarily work in Hong Kong or in the UK or in the US or in Brazil. Nonetheless, I do hope that we can inspire each other as within this session and also throughout the conference. So without further ado, as mentioned, let's see whether this works. Yes, I will kind of start with introducing a little bit Denmark from the perspective of the technology. Given that within the presentation and also my paper, my focus is how we kind of embrace technology a bit more within the legal education, not only from the knowledge perspective, but also from the skill set perspective. So working and understanding and whatever the future is going to bring, however we are going to redesign our society in the wake of more digital rather than analog. What does it mean for the legal education? I also speak a little bit about digital literacy, because I do think that this is the starting point for many of us who wish to introduce a little bit more technology into the legal studies. And then, I provide a little bit of reflections on how my kind of process has been. And then I will end with 2 case studies where I ultimately will be just talking again about my experiences and reflections on 2 courses that I've developed. One from 2016, since 2016 has been on, and the other has been there on since this year, and also during COVID and so on and so forth. All right, so Denmark, many of you, and maybe not many of you, might know that is definitely one of the most digital countries in the EU. The EU publishes every year this DeSci index, the Digital Economy and Society Index, and in 2020, Denmark was number 3. Number 1 was Finland, number 2 was Sweden, and later on there were Netherlands, Malta, Ireland, Estonia. This is obviously just about the European Union. And the index is kind of a composite index that summarizes relevant indicators on Europe's digital performance and tracks the digital competitiveness within the member states. It has several kind of things several elements that it looks at. One is connectivity, then human capital, meaning really the digital skills, use of internet services, digital public services, and so. And if you're interested in it, it's actually interesting to see how different countries differ from one another. And what is relevant for the purposes of this kind of a talk, my interest is definitely the human capital and digital skills. And I think that the first question we need to ask ourselves when we want to introduce any kind of new tech or digital skills within our teaching, and again, not only from the substantive, but also from the kind of a procedural element, is what are the skills of the students that we are dealing with, right? And the problem with this DSI is, and even though it pushes Denmark fairly high, is it's a kind of discrepancy about the data that is actually reports, because on one hand side there's this both basic digital skills in a sense of, you know, how often do you use internet and whether you order things on internet, and then there is a second segment which is like specialists, right? So programmers, ICT specialists, and you see the discrepancy between the percentages there. But there is very little that is actually focusing on somewhere in the middle, right? Because lawyers, most presumably, if we kind of wish for them to understand the technology, we obviously want them to know a little bit more than just how to order items online, but maybe we don't necessarily need them to be able to code whatever in Python, right? So this is a little bit of the, I would say, reflections on the limitations of the data that we have at the moment. Nonetheless, Denmark has been very strong in focusing on the digitalization over the period of time. And I just bring here a couple of examples. There is this action plan for technology in teaching and learning, both on the digital learning as a form. So how do we online blend it and all this kind of keywords and buzzwords that we are often hearing about, but also the substance, so learning about technology. And obviously, looking at it, we see and we understand that we need to start fairly early on, meaning grammar schools when the kids are 6, 7. And again, many of you probably have kids, so you know how kids are very quick with any kind of new technology. And we see that more and more tech courses are brought in, whether it's for mathematics or whether it's for physics and so on and so forth. But again, if you look at the data and of the programs that are on the platform currently, that's probably what our students will be in 10, 15 years, right? Because these are young kids, so until they come to the uni, it will take a little bit. So my then starting point, okay, so what are actual competencies of my students today? And this is just over the last 4 years of teaching the courses. I came to the conclusion observations, and I do usually at the very beginning of the course a little bit of kind of a data analysis and data statistics with my students using other tech tools that they tell me a little bit about where they feel what they feel comfortable with and what they know of and about. And many of them feel comfortable of using technology. Again, this is a very broad sense, but yeah, their knowledge about and of technology is limited. And we can talk about blockchain, we can talk about AI, we can talk about a number of other things. And they feel that they're good users, but they not necessarily understand what is happening, obviously, behind the kind of the front end. Programming, I had this year one student who felt comfortable with programming. Other than that, they never even had any programming, what for me was fairly surprising, because going back in my high school education, it was more than 20, well, not, yeah, unfortunately, more than 20 years ago. We had programming at that time, obviously in different languages, but still kind of this knowledge is missing somehow. Computational thinking also very limited. Often you unfortunately again will hear from law students that the reason why they chose law is that they didn't like math. and that can be a little bit challenging when you want to bring a little bit more computations to their thinking and how they think about the legal problems. And digital design, so design thinking and so on, often this is the first time that they even hear about anything connected to that. Okay, so this is what is the starting point, and how I also reflect about the digital literacy, and I would just use the definition by the American Library Association, saying simply that it's the ability to use information and communication technologies to find, evaluate, create, and communicate information requiring both cognitive and technical skills, right? So definitely the digital literacy reflects the technical skills. And we could have discussions about why do we need it as a society, as general public, and why do lawyers need it? And I just put a couple of thoughts forward, right? Whether it's internet safety and privacy setting and social media. So those are probably the things that we would talk with our kids about, that they need to be cautious about. But also our parents, if they order something online and whether they get some offer and so on. So there are different levels. But then again, talking about the lawyers who are to shape the future digital kind of society, they need to understand a little bit more. So that is my starting point. Now, at the Faculty of Law in Copenhagen, we have been kind of together trying to answer a couple of questions in regard to the technology, and when and how should we introduce technology into our legal education. And there are different voices and different research and different experiences. And I think that at this point, we are really just seeing the experience more than anything. And again, it's very contextual, and it might work here and it might not work at your institution. Why I think, again, this is precisely because we are, or our students are going to help designing the society and their structures, enhancing the quality, the transparency, reliability. We here in Denmark often talk about trust, given the fact that this is a high trust society. What does that mean? How can we translate this trust from human to technology? What are the requirements and so on? And I do think that many of these questions need to be answered together with lawyers, and obviously other specialists, but law should definitely be there. And then it comes to the question, okay, so when do we introduce technology into legal education? And if you look across different faculty of laws, you see that there are specialized either LLM programs, they could be specialized courses. But I think that, and our experience here, and this is, I think, where we're going to go in the upcoming years, is to try to put a little bit of this technology through everything and each and every subject that we're teaching, because ultimately it is part of it. Technology becomes or already is part of our life in all the aspects. So yeah, and so I do think that we need to embrace it as soon as possible, and also from the perspective of the students, so they feel comfortable over the years that they spend at the faculty. And here it's 5 years, so it's 3 + 2, 3 years bachelor's plus 2 years master's. But all of them need to do this 5 years if they want to qualify as a lawyer or as an attorney. So the approach here has been definitely that we try to introduce technology in each and every course, but then there are a couple of technology courses that focus specifically on AI. I have another course that talks about blockchain and new kind of technologies within corporate and capital market law. But then there is this course that is specifically, and I will talk about it in a minute, that I have called Digital Lawyer. A little bit, maybe too much, but it gets the attention of the students, where I focus more on the technology and the skill set and how the students can become a bit more aware of the technology rather than the legal aspects of the technology. But yes, so this is something that maybe you also need to reflect as a teacher, but also on the institutional level, because I do think that as long as you have the institutional support, it's much easier to to change certain things. And now, yes, so how is the big question? How do we do it? How do we make it in the best possible way? Or how do we plan for introducing the technology within the courses, within the education, and so on? And my experience also is from the perspective of what is it that actually will make our graduates successful, right? And you often see when we talk about legal education this T-shape diagram talking about different skills, where in the main pillar you would have the legal knowledge and then you have the skills on the top of it. And I definitely agree with it. And I would somehow put it, if we use the classical diagram, 50%, 30% legal science and legal education, maybe 50% skills, maybe 20% technology. We could definitely discuss the percentages, but this is just like a gut feeling ultimately, what I see, what will happen over the years, not necessarily today, but as we go forward. And again, something to reflect is how much more can we expect from our students. They have so many different courses, so different subjects to be qualified, and obviously they need to know constitutional law and they need to know criminal law and administrative law and so on. So do we make it compulsory also for them to bring in the technology? Do we just do it for few of them? But then again, if we are to face a digital society, shouldn't they all have some kind of an obligatory courses? So just to emphasize the challenge, ultimately, how to design this technological element in the legal education. Yes, so ultimately, and now reflecting, and I think I have not really much time, but to talk about a little bit what I've been interested in, and what I've been doing is precisely being doing research within the corporate and capital market law, but still emphasizing the technological knowledge and soft skills. And there have been these two courses, and this is where I'll end, and I hope to get some questions and we can discuss. One course is called How to Start a Startup and Law of Startup Companies, where we kind of go through the entire life cycle of a startup. And this I call the so-called intermediary learning. And what do I mean by that is that students work directly with startups. So I do not necessarily introduce a tech element, but because many of the startups have the tech element and they are to advise them and analyze certain legal issues, they themselves need to become a little bit more aware, and they need to study a bit more the technology of that specific startup that they're using in order to understand, right? So in that way, they get the exposure to technology, but I do not necessarily push the technology on them directly. And aside, when talking about the skills, and I think this is also important to emphasize, is that I push for a little bit more innovation and entrepreneurship within our courses. So to also embrace this different skill set that I do find important for them as they go and as they develop as lawyers or legal practitioners or businessmen or businesswomen. And the second course is this DigiLawyer course, training lawyers for the challenge of digitalization, where we specifically, and why I say we is because there are different people teaching different elements. I have computer scientists teaching programming, and I have people who specialize in data analysis, teaching data analysis, so they get it from different people who are experts in their fields. And pushing for a bit more digital design and computational thinking very specifically. And if there are questions, and I think I'll just end here, if there are questions on how the experience is, I can tell you a lot about how uncomfortable the students have felt, because they felt that it was too much technology. But at the same time, at the end of the course, they felt that, oh, I definitely learned something new. But at the very beginning, they were very much pushing against having courses with computer scientists about programming. But yes, so I just leave it here so you understand my approach, and I'm very much looking forward to all your questions. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you ever so much, Dr. Andhov, and a fascinating insight there as to how this is emerging within your legal education system. Could I ask delegates, please, to get questions into me via the chat so I can pose them to Dr. Andhov? And whilst we're waiting delegates to interact with us in that way, perhaps I can use Chair's privilege here and kick off the proceedings. When I present later in this session, you'll see the strong synergy between the way that we're thinking about moving digital literacy onto the curriculum. And I think it's a really interesting thing. I mean, I was asked very recently to externally kind of review a master's program in law and digital technologies over in the South Ural State University in Russia. And it's really interesting, I think, because we're almost dealing with two different things here, but they do collide in a way, because we're talking about upskilling our students by preparing them for this marketplace that is going to be this digitalized world by the time that they exit as graduates. But we're also talking about, so there I think we're talking more about the kind of transferability of their skills to get on board with digitalization in its many forms. And we're also talking about the kind of more substantive impact of technology upon law, which prompts that we have to take up these discussions and we have to develop our curriculum to cover matters such as, e-commerce, cyber crimes, blockchain technologies, and so on. And it was interesting when you said that you've been having talks on a faculty level about this, and particularly interesting to see that you've developed those two programs, because as I say, from my work with this Russian university, I became aware that actually these programs are emerging, year by year, prolifically. So I wondered what kind of talks were you having at faculty level, and whether there was any reticence amongst your faculty colleagues to adopt this kind of technology, and if so, were there any kind of patterns in that reticence? So were there certain groups that perhaps you'd identify as perceiving barriers? Were they less ready? So quite a lot there, sorry, Dr. Andhov.
Yes.
Yeah, if you want to unpack all that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Roberts. I do think, and I think that all of the faculties will face it. There will be certain groups that are very much pro. There are certain groups that feel like, okay, they see the value, they see the importance of that kind of move, and there will be definitely a group that doesn't understand why suddenly the legal theory should have anything to do with technology. Right, and you can argue with them, but there are zillions reasons ultimately why legal theories can be one of the most important things, how to look at technology, right? So ultimately, I think it's all about really, as I said, support from the leadership, so from the management, and again, it depends on how the faculty is structured and who has what kind of powers, and we all know that being at the university is almost as being in politics. But I do think that continuous discussions, and I wouldn't push anyone to do that, if they do not feel confident with the technology, or they do not feel confident enough to know about the technology, I wouldn't push those colleagues to that this is a must that they need to do. I think that we can do it gradually. You will have probably a couple of younger, but not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily need to do anything with the age, but some colleagues who will feel that they want to be the pioneers. And if you create enough support for them, I think that they will lead, and even if the legal theory will not have the tech component, then be it, the students will get it from other courses. And I think that this gradual discussions with the support from the management is extremely important. And I can tell you, back in 2016, when I started to talk about the startup law and how I want to bring in the startups that students can work with and really work on their skills, and this is obviously for master students, not for bachelor students. Very many people were frowning upon it, and they were like, but we are not a clinic, and clinical education doesn't necessarily have as much value as, let's say, in the Anglo-Saxon legal world here in Denmark. So they were kind of frowning upon it. But I do think that now they see that, well, you have an intermediary to introduce you. So even if you don't necessarily feel comfortable about the technology, because these other participants are coming and embracing the technology together with the students, So I think there are different patterns how people could go on, but I do think that we will see, as you very correctly mentioning out, that they're just popping out around the entire world as we go.
Which is great, because of course in time to come we will produce this very strong community of practice, and there is opportunities such as this today to share those excellent practice that's transferable from one jurisdiction to the other, because that's the excellent thing about digitalization, is it does do away with jurisdictional issues. If we're talking about e-commerce, we're talking about commerce that takes place globally. So it really speaks to my specialism of private international law. I'm really glad that you raised that point about management, though, because it's one of the things that, due to time, I'm not going to be able to focus on into greater detail about on my paper. But you're absolutely right. Getting that infrastructure is so important to be able to allow us to develop these curriculum matters, and also to change people's perceptions of their identity as teachers, I think. Because it's going to dramatically change moving forward. We do have one question in, Dr. Andhov, and I wonder if you would be happy to respond to this. So Puteri Amirnuddin, I hope that's pronounced correctly, has asked, do you teach data analytics as a module by itself, or is it embedded into law modules?
So what we do is that I actually have a brilliant PhD student that he uses for his research data analytics. He does comparative analysis of different EU decisions. So he actually shows students, so we have the legal structure, but using the data analytics. So what kind of tools, what ultimately the tool is doing, how to understand the tool, right? Because also for you to interpret, let's say, decisions, you need to understand how that tool actually came to the decisions and used the decisions and took the data out of it for you to actually ultimately make some kind of conclusions about it. So the scope is within the law. So they're analyzing and, let's say, finding patterns within decisions of the Court of Justice of the European Union. So the frame is legal, but again, they're using technology to get kind of different outcomes that in usual courses and usual subjects.
Excellent. Thank you ever so much for your fascinating paper and your readiness to respond so comprehensively to all the questions.